You know, a lot of people tend to look down upon the Amazing Spider-Man series, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure why. Oh, yeah, all of that. That's probably a good reason. However, and maybe this is just me, the Amazing Spider-Man series kind of feels like a dark timeline of sorts. I mean, there is just something about them buried beneath all of this fat that could have made the Amazing Spider-Man series a compelling story. So today, I'm gonna try and create my own story, and I'm gonna try to fix what some have called the worst Spider-Man movie of all time. Today, I'm gonna try to fix The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Hey guys, my name is DJ and welcome to a new series called What They Should Have Made. The series in which I take a look at a fictional story from the world of movies, video games, what have you, and try to rewrite it in my own way. And oh boy, okay, where do we begin with this one? So, with the Amazing Spider-Man 2 rewrite, we have to deal with a lot of factors before we dive on in. First off, the movie is coming off of another film that, in my opinion, wasn't really a great launching point for the series. Don't get me wrong, I do believe that there was an interesting aspect of Spider-Man that was worth telling in The Amazing Spider-Man, but it certainly wasn't done in the most interesting and compelling way. And truth be told, the acting in that movie is probably what saved it from its mediocre story. However, this isn't a rewriting of the first Amazing Spider-Man movie because, well, if you want an interesting Spidey origin, just go watch the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. But today we're going to be trying to take that broken launching pad of the first movie and try to create some sort of an interesting sequel. Now, one of the many criticisms of Amazing Spider-Man 2, besides the everything about it, is that the entire movie kinda just felt like a massive setup for the next one. Weirdly, the entire actual plot of the movie is kind of just filler. Electro, Peter's parents, hell, even Green Goblin are all parts of the movie that you weirdly don't need to pay attention to. Instead, it's all the little Easter eggs surrounding the movie that the developers want you to notice. And really, that's just not how you're supposed to make a movie. If the overall story of a movie is not meant to be the main focus of that movie, then why the hell would you even tell that story in the first place? So yeah, in my rewrite, we are not going to be focusing on all those stupid Easter eggs. In fact, if you really want to make this series feel fresh without having to rely on all of these stupid Easter eggs, then just get rid of the Osborns. They already just dominated the entire last trilogy with Harry and Norman appearing in every single movie, and some time away from them is exactly what this movie needs to feel unique. Spider-Man has one of the most colorful rogues galleries in all of comic book history, and you don't really need to have the goblins clogging up that system. As such, for this story, we're going to only be focusing on one main villain, Electro. I kinda like the idea of Electro being an overly clingy fan of Spider-Man. Weirdly, this idea is actually kind of ahead of its time as we've seen today, with over-needy and invasive fans growing into this terrible phenomenon on social media. And I predict that this A-plot with Electro's obsessions can actually work very well with a B-plot all about Gwen Stacy and another female character. But more on them later. For now, finally, let us actually begin with this rewrite. So, in this movie, we begin with an exciting bank robbery scene. That's right, scrap all of the dumb Peter Parker's parents bullshit and just stick to what people want to see. Let's stick with Spider-Man beating the hell out of some bad guys. So we see that these criminals have barged into a bank, shooting up the place and telling all the employees to put the money in the bag. During this, we see a nervous Max Dillon wearing an Oscorp badge as one of the hostages. However, obviously, their plan gets thwarted by Spider-Man, who swings into the bank. He's got a new suit, a new attitude, and he's ready to go. So Spider-Man starts to take out some of these criminals. Everything seems to be going good until we see another criminal point a gun at Spider-Man. Spider-Man freezes, before Max Dillon runs in and takes down the robber. Spider-Man thanks him, reading his name off of his Oscorp badge, just like in the real movie, before swinging off again. And as Spider-Man goes off to fight some of the escaping robbers, we see Max Dillon looking at Spidey almost with loving eyes, saying to the other hostages, "Did you see that? Spider-Man thanked me! Me of all people! My senpai finally noticed me!" Can't even read that with a straight face, Jesus. And of course, Spider-Man takes down the rest of the bad guys in some cool action set piece. That is, before looking at a nearby clock and racing away as he realizes that he's almost late for school. But since this is Peter Parker we're talking about, he still manages to get to school a few minutes late, interrupting the teacher's lecture before sitting in the back of the class with his head buried in his backpack. However, a few seats in front of him is none other than Gwen Stacy. And as Peter looks at Gwen, we see a flashback to his conversation with Captain Stacy, where he told Peter not to be with Gwen so that she stays safe. So, sadly, Peter can't be with Gwen Stacy no matter how badly he wants to. Sorry, Gwen, I guess you're not getting any of that spider dick. And after we see this sad look in Peter's eyes, we jump ahead to his dinner at home with Aunt May. However, in this conversation, we watch as Peter is almost dismissive, almost acting depressed in his conversation with Aunt May. And this attitude actually leads to a bit of an argument with May. May tells Peter that she doesn't like this negative attitude of his. He's constantly out late, he's always dismissive to Aunt May, and she's even gotten calls that he is late to school every day. However, instead of continuing this conversation, Peter decides to just storm off into the city with this angry and depressing attitude. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the city, we cut to Max Dillon's apartment. And yeah, I guess you could say that Max's obsession with Spider-Man is definitely taking hold as we watch as his entire apartment is covered with a variety of pictures of Spider-Man. Max Dillon is looking at these images of Spider-Man almost deranged-like as he hears a police scanner in the background. Max Dillon just sits down, looks at a police scanner, and kind of just seemingly waits for something before he, and I really like this scene actually, before he puts a cheap yellow mask on his face with some hand-drawn spikes with marker. I don't know, the visual just seems really funny, and it's a bit of a shout out to the original design of Electro, because I think that would be kinda interesting. But after this nod to Electro, we cut back over to Spider-Man on the rooftops, who we can see looking down at Gwen Stacy's apartment. Clearly, this sadness is taking hold of Spider-Man as he looks down at Gwen Stacy knowing that he just can't have her. And before you say anything, I do understand that this sounds really creepy, but we'll get into that later. Also, Tobey did it in the first Spider-Man movie, so I don't know, I think I deserve a pass here. However, afterwards, he looks up at another building and watches as a mysterious black figure enters another building through the rooftop. As such, Spider-Man goes to investigate before seeing none other than the Black Cat. And as the two start to have an acrobatic and back and forth fight, we watch as Black Cat charges towards Spider-Man, who dodges out of the way, breaking a glass vase. This, of course, then triggers the alarm as they continue to fight. But before Spider-Man can take down this mysterious feline once and for all, the fight gets interrupted as we watch a door swing open in the background. Spider-Man looks over and sees Max Dillon in his, to be fair, really dumb-looking yellow mask. Of course, Black Cat decides to take advantage of this distraction and quickly escapes. And once Spider-Man realizes that she's gone, he turns his frustration and anger towards Max Dillon himself. He starts blaming Max for letting Black Cat get away, telling him that he never needed his help. Instead, Max should just stay home where it's safe for him. Spidey then swings away, leaving Max Dillon standing alone in front of the building before Max decides to take off his mask, throwing it in the streets in disgust. Afterwards, as Max is feeling a bit bad about himself, we cut ahead to see Peter Parker in school. Again, Peter is obviously looking in the direction of Gwen Stacy before she actually decides to confront him. Gwen says that, well, that she sees that Peter keeps staring at her. Okay, she's not stupid. She tells Peter that she can't be with him anymore. Even though she may have once really liked Peter, she knows that Peter is bad for her in the long run. She tried to be with him at the end of the last movie, but she was right. They can't be together after all. Peter stands there, basically swallowing his sadness before quickly escaping the situation and walking to an outside hallway. However, as Peter stands there with a tear in his eye, he looks over and realizes that there's a little black cat standing alone in a field. As Peter heads over to the cat, he realizes that there's a little sticky note hanging off of her fur. So he peels the sticky note off the creature, reading, "Last night was a lot of fun." Peter wipes away the tear before realizing that this now means that Black Cat clearly knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So, later on that night, he decides to go out and try to find Black Cat in the city before eventually finding her. They have a bit of a back and forth conversation, perhaps with a bit of flirtatious undertones, with Black Cat promising not to expose him as Peter Parker if he promises to help her out with something. You see, those thugs from the beginning of the movie turn out to actually be only a small handful of guys in a larger overall gang. And, of course, all of them seemingly want to see Black Cat dead. So, Spider-Man reluctantly agrees to help her. Meanwhile, we cut back to Max Dillon, who we see entering Oscorp with a box of tools, perhaps suggesting that he's some sort of handyman for the company. And it seems as though he's tasked to repair something as he enters this really scientific-looking room. Think, I don't know, futuristic tubes and weird glowing vases, that sort of thing. However, before we truly see what happens with Max Dillon, we cut back over to Black Cat and Spider-Man as they enter this mysterious-looking building. Of course, this ends up being the gang's hideout as they beat down a whole bunch of goons. And I actually think this would be kind of another comedic moment in the movie where we see them beating the hell out of all these henchmen, and we just cut back over to Max Dillon just going do as he fixes all this stuff in the scientific lab. However, as Black Cat and Spider-Man finally take out all the goons, who walks in but everybody's favorite hardhead super criminal in Hammerhead? And as the situation changes in that goon's hideout with the introduction of Hammerhead, we watch as Max Dillon's situation starts to change as well. As Spider-Man and Black Cat team up to take down Hammerhead once and for all, we watch as Oscorp Tower at the top of the building gets struck with lightning. While the lightning travels down the building, it suddenly stops and enters a metal rod that Max Dillon is holding inside the scientific lab. As he gets shocked by all of this electricity, he falls over onto all of this scientific machinery as well. Look, Electro's origin is kind of really silly and cartoony, so I figured, screw it, let's just go into that. But, to cut back to the story, we watch as Max Dillon just lays there on the floor, and the audience don't really know if he's just laying there unconscious, or if he's straight up dead. That is, until we hear his police scanner once again off in the distance. But, before we can see what happens next, we cut back to Black Cat and Spider-Man, who continue to battle Hammerhead. And as Hammerhead is standing over Spider-Man ready to kill him, we watch as he gets shocked with a quick bolt of electricity before collapsing to the ground beside Spider-Man. As he collapses, obviously it is revealed that none other than Electro is the one that shocked him. Spider-Man and Black Cat clearly are really confused by all of this and are wondering who the hell this electric guy is. However, before anything else happens next, Spider-Man kneels down and checks the pulse of Hammerhead before announcing that he's dead. However, Electro is clearly still excited about all of this. Electro then looks at Spider-Man before saying, "Did you see that? Did you see what I just did? I saved you! I know I wasn't much help before, but I saved you this time!" Spider-Man, Black Cat continue to look at Electro, very confused, wondering who the hell he is, what the hell he is, before Spider-Man recognizes that he's Max Dillon. Spider-Man looks worried, not just because of Electro's new state, but also because he just killed Hammerhead. He starts to tell him that killing Hammerhead was not a good idea. You shouldn't kill people. Of course, this creates the classic Batman argument, with Max saying that he firmly believes that he did the right thing. I mean, he did just take Hammerhead off the streets. He will no longer do things like rob banks and kill innocent people. They continue to argue, with Spider-Man telling Electro that clearly he needs some sort of medical attention. But Electro continues to argue. Electro tells Spider-Man that now he needs Max. Meanwhile, as this obsessive conversation continues to unfold, it's Black Cat who swiftly escapes the conversation, realizing that this could have a bit of an explosive outcome. And of course, the argument does eventually continue to escalate, with Spider-Man hammering down that he needs help, but Electro refusing to get any. And as Electro continues to refuse, Spider-Man decides to start whipping his webs at Electro before watching as they all dissolve around him due to the electricity. Electro then, very quickly, decides to shoot down Spider-Man before saying, "If you won't accept me as a partner, then you can't be partners with anyone." And as Spider-Man falls unconscious, we watch as Electro starts to leave the building. Eventually, the sun does come up, and we watch as Spider-Man starts to wake up out of this uncomfortable situation. And as a weak Spider-Man stands there, he realizes that he hasn't been home all night, and he has to go back to his house. However, when he does get home, he is greeted with Aunt May, who is sitting on his bed. When Aunt May sees Spider-Man, she shockingly doesn't flinch. She instead asks him if he's okay. Because, yeah, of course Aunt May knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. He literally came home at the end of the last movie, covered in cuts and blood, as the news is literally talking about Spider-Man. Of course Aunt May knows he's Spider-Man. And through this moment, Aunt May starts to tell Peter that she understands what's going on with him. She understands why he can't be with Gwen. She understands why he keeps coming home late. She understands why every time she looks at Peter, all she gets is this boy covered in cuts and blood, or a boy who is just angry and frustrated with the world. And even though she would love to have this conversation, she knows that there is no time for that. She points at a nearby television, which is playing the top news story of the day. It shows that Electro is roaming around the city, destroying cars and buildings before screaming out and saying that he wants to know who Spider-Man really is. So Aunt May, with a concerned and yet slightly proud look on her face, she decides to tell Peter Parker to go out and fight Electro. He may be hurt, he may be bruised, but he's got the support of Aunt May and an entire city to save. And now we jump to Times Square in bright daylight. And as Electro decides to torment the entire city, desperately wanting to know who Spider-Man's identity is, we watch as Gwen Stacy pops out and tells Electro that she knows who Spider-Man is. Gwen tells Electro that if he stops destroying things, if he stops hurting all of these people, then she will tell him who Spider-Man truly is. However, before anything else happens, we watch as Spider-Man swoops in and looks to save the day. Spidey, once again, tells Electro that he needs to stop this. Look at what he's doing. He's hurting all these people, and for what? Because Spider-Man just doesn't want to be friends with him? Electro looks at him, obviously getting ready for a villain monologue, before telling him that it's not just about Spider-Man. This is about everyone else. This is about everyone who just walked past him. Everyone who saw him as nothing more than a face in the crowd. He's tired of being overlooked, and Spider-Man was the last straw. He will force people not only to be his friend, but to like and respect him. And in this anger, Spider-Man decides to charge towards Electro, who, well, very quickly takes him down once again. And afterwards, Electro decides to take this Gwen Stacy hostage, the one who apparently knows Spider-Man's true identity. However, even though Spider-Man is clearly hurt, even though Spider-Man is clearly too weak to continue, he decides to get back up and chase down Electro before he can get too far away. Spider-Man stops Electro, telling him that if he wants to see Spidey suffer, then fine. But Gwen Stacy has nothing to do with this. Electro agrees, before putting Gwen Stacy down and the two battle. However, Spider-Man realizes that, yeah, he can't really hurt Electro. That is, before looking out at a nearby water plant. So, Spider-Man decides to lead Electro to that very same water plant as the battle continues. But Electro still seemingly has the upper hand in this battle, telling Spider-Man that he will die as Electro not only becomes a popular and legendary figure, but a god to the people of New York City. That is, of course, just like in classic Spider-Man vs. Electro fashion, we watch as Spider-Man breaks through one of the water valves and drenches Electro, clearly weakening him before taking him down with one last punch. Spider-Man, through all of that, seemingly stopped the unstoppable. So, finally, after all of that, Max Dillon is finally taken into custody as Spider-Man finally gets a chance to do the one thing he's wanted to do the entire movie. He finally talks to Gwen Stacy and apologizes. Peter finally says that he's sorry that Gwen's dad died, and that he's sorry that he wasn't there to support her afterwards. But he does appreciate that Gwen stood up to Electro for the sake of this city, instead of just obsessing and pining for an affection that he was too scared to admit. He should have just done what he always wanted to do. Sure, he may have made a promise to Captain Stacy, but maybe he can make a new one. A promise with Gwen. Aw, look at that. The sweet nerd boy ended it with a really nice and romantic gesture. So, Gwen and Peter are finally together. The city is finally safe, and Aunt May finally knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And hopefully, we have a much more satisfying ending than what we got in the real Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie. It's a story that finally has a lot of potential, a lot of loose ends, and a lot of closure for Peter Parker. So yeah, that's gonna wrap up this video here. What do you think of this alternate version of The Amazing Spider-Man 2? Did you guys like it? Did you even hate it? Let me know down in the comments. But, of course, thank you all so much for watching this first episode on What They Should Have Made, and have a good day. Bye-bye.